this is the only job of the vice president, is to introduce the president. And this is unnecessary because you all know our president, but I hope I'll provide some insights that you may not know. Well, this is the only time since World War II that a president and the officers actually have served for 2 years. And you see the last time this happened, there were some very notable people, Barney Brooks, Dr. Oxner. Well, Dr. Chapman was born in Charlotte, Charles and Florence Chapman. His father was an anesthesiologist, and Will is the youngest of 6 children. And I must thank his wife, Marty, and also his secretary, Megan, for providing some of these incredible photographs. Now, his early life was spent in a lot of outdoor activities and sports, something that continues to his adult life. You can see him showing a horse, wrestling. His undergraduate years were spent at UNC, where he obtained a bachelor's in chemistry. He was Phi Beta Kappa. It was there that he met Marty, and although they knew each other in college, they actually only started dating during the last 6 years of college. After they graduated, they actually drove to Kentucky and watched the Kentucky Derby, an event dear to my heart. Medical school was at MUSC, and that's where both his father and his uncle went to medical school. He was elected to AOA. Marty, on the other hand, attended physical therapy school at Duke. Her first job was in Charleston. They got married actually a day before Will was going to start a urology rotation in England. A residency was at Vanderbilt, and during residency he did a 2-year research fellowship in hepatobiliary research with Lester Williams. You can see on the left side of the screen him receiving the Harold Wilson Chief Resident Award from Dr. Sawyers, and remember that's very poignant because Dr. Sawyers is a past president of the Southern, and before him H. William Scott was also one of the first honorary fellows of the Southern. Here, it was there at Vanderbilt that he wrote the first of his 300 publications. During residency, the Chapmans added to their family. Their sons, Will Jr. and Robert, were born. Following residency, he decided he wanted to do a fellowship in hepatobiliary surgery and had this all set up to do in Switzerland with Les Blumgart. And unfortunately, that was when Dr. Blumgart decided he wanted to go back to Memorial. So he arranged something else. He arranged to do a fellowship in hepatobiliary surgery, but also liver transplantation. This was done at King's College Hospital in London with Irving Benjamin. And the addition of liver transplant was going to be a fateful thing. Now, when he finished his fellowship, he came back to Nashville, and this started a very productive time. Daughter Maggie was born, but he had very productive time in Nashville, writing a lot, obtaining federal funding and other grant funding, numerous peer-reviewed publications. He won numerous awards from societies. And he was actually so successful, he was recruited to St. Louis to Washington University. And I won't read all these titles that he now holds. He won mentoring awards from the Transplant Society, but his main inducement to move to St. Louis was actually the ability to build a transplant unit there himself. His main clinical interests are adult liver transplantation and HBB surgery for both benign and malignant disease. You can see on the left side of the screen the incredible transplant unit he's built with 6 transplant surgeons and 3 fellows. In the middle with a normothermic organ perfusion device, and on the right operating. But leadership positions aren't new to him. He's been president of several organizations, the American HBB Association, the Western Surgical, member of numerous editorial boards. But what do you know about Will Chapman, the man? Well, I'm told that since moving to St. Louis, he's taken a fondness to the St. Louis Cardinals. And if you ever want to locate him outside of St. Louis, all you have to do is look for the red St. Louis Cardinals hat, where you can locate him whether he's in Florence, in Venice, or in Paris. What things are important to Dr. Chapman? Well, it's family and relationship with colleagues. You can see here a beautiful picture of him in Costa Rica on horseback with his family, with his wife and children. and pictures of him with his family in the top middle picture with 4 of his 5 siblings, and again, pictures with him and Marty and his children. Now, he also loves outdoor activities. Hunting, you can see him here with new member, Dr. Hunt, and teaching the next generation of Hunt and Stain the nuances of hunting. He loves his dogs, private time with his dogs. And I'm told by Marty that when COVID hit and the hospital stopped serving lunches, he was seen at all hours with his green egg grilling things. Top left photo, his son is also a surgeon, a butt and colorectal surgeon, and they would grill, and his office was a veritable storage for different barbecue sauces. Now, our president is a mentor, a teacher, and a leader. I ask you to welcome our president, Dr. William Chapman.
Thank you, Susan, for those very kind and generous remarks to what is a real highlight of my career. This organization is one of the most unique and respected surgical associations, and being selected as president is a career highlight and a humbling event. There are so many members of this organization more deserving than me, but thank you all for this incredible privilege. Now, what I'd like to do in the next few minutes, besides recognizing a few individuals who have been personally and professionally important to my career, is discuss some of the unique events that have occurred since our last meeting 2 years ago. In addition to the worldwide COVID pandemic, we've also lived through increased recognition of some long-standing serious social and healthcare disparities in the United States and worldwide. I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing some of these issues and especially how they impact us in the South. And we'll also focus on access issues that exist in the field of transplantation. Our Ad Hoc Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, formed 1 year ago, has been working diligently with focus on leadership promotion and opportunities within this organization, and also within our institutions for the future. I'd remind everyone that tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, Dr. Bob Higgins will give more detail about these aspects here in this room. And I hope any of you, both surgeons and non-surgeon guests, will plan to attend. As you heard earlier, we live in St. Louis, Missouri, probably best known for the Arch of St. Louis, opened in 1967 after a competition to establish a landmark representative of the city of St. Louis. St. Louis has always been known as the gateway to the West and a land of opportunity. St. Louis is a river city built in early development of our country based on river traffic. Probably the best known St. Louisan is Charles Lindbergh, shown here with his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, the first manned aircraft to complete a transatlantic flight, which occurred in 1927. Shown on the right, not known by most, was Charles Lindbergh's interest in the development of an oxygenated perfusion system, and he's shown here with Nobel laureate surgeon Alexis Carrel. Interestingly, this development has come full circle as we now are utilizing these oxygenated perfusion systems to assess and improve donor organs prior to transplantation. But I'll talk about that a little more later on. Lindbergh, impressively, was featured on the cover of Time magazine on 3 occasions. but he later fell into disfavor after being seen to support the efforts of the Nazi regime during World War II. Like almost everyone present here, I owe so much to my parents and family. My father attended the Medical College of South Carolina, as you heard, the predecessor to MUSC, and following graduation, almost immediately entered World War II as a medic physician. He was deployed to England and then to France via Normandy within days of D-Day. He did not see or communicate except by letters to my mother for 4 years. Following his return, he settled in Walterboro, South Carolina, and along with his 2 brothers, one an oral surgeon and one a general practitioner like himself, opened the Chapman Clinic. The right panel of the slide shows the location of Walterboro, a small enclave in South Carolina, which subsequently held a fair amount of importance to our family. After 3 years of practice, my father traveled to Boston. As you heard, he completed an anesthesia residency and subsequently returned to Charlotte for the remainder of his career. Ties made to Walterboro stuck with our family, including many trips to maintain connections to individuals there and beach vacations, which occurred annually at Edisto Beach, a sleepy community situated between the resorts of Hilton Head and Kiowa Islands. Family has always been an important feature for my parents and my siblings. When my mother died at age 92 in 2011, she left her modest estate to establish a trust which has a primary purpose of maintaining annual family gatherings at Edisto Beach. We now have traveled there for over 50 years consecutively, with the exception of last year when we were unable to travel due to COVID. Cousins especially know they have a free place to stay and they are well looked after, so they travel in annually from all over the country. This year we had 5 houses and over 50 for the annual event. I would like to pay special thanks to my wonderful wife, Marty, and our immediate family. My daughter, Maggie, lives in rural Idaho, where she was sent as part of her work with Teach for America, here with her boyfriend, Ian, and also our son, Robert, and his wife, Emily. William and Ashley were not able to join us, but we've been able to see them regularly and their 2 children as he finishes his general surgery residency at WashU. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to those who provide opportunity to us by their service in the U.S. Armed Forces. Our son Robert left his very successful role as an engineer with Exxon 4 years ago to join the Marines as a second lieutenant. This summer there was a catastrophic collapse by the Afghan military, as everyone recalls, and this occurred before key personnel could leave the country. At that time, the President ordered 4,000 Marines and several thousand additional forces into Kabul. Marty and I were not immediately aware, but learned Robert was part of that initial deployment, which was a scary time for us. Amazingly, over less than a 2-week period, the largest ever non-combatant evacuation in history took place. But this operation was not without major risk. A suicide bomber from a Taliban splinter group detonated explosives at one of the airport entrance gates, killing 13 U.S. Armed Forces and over 100 Afghan citizens, and many others suffered major injuries. One of those Marines killed was Jared Smits from St. Louis, and the picture on the left shows the 30-mile procession held in his honor. Another Marine, Nicole G., affectionately known by her comrades as Mom, is shown here the day before she was killed, holding one of the Afghan children on the way to evacuation. I'd like to have a moment of silence in recognition for all these military personnel, including many of you in this room, who do so much to allow unique opportunities for all of us in our everyday lives. Thank you. I have many individuals that I'd like to recognize who have been instrumental to me in my career pathway, but will only mention a few given time limitations. As you heard, we spent 18 years in Nashville before moving to St. Louis. I spent 1 year at King's before returning to Vanderbilt after my fellowship. Now, my training at King's was intended to be solely focused on HPB surgery. However, the King's unit performs the largest number of liver transplants in Europe, so I spent some time there working with the transplant team. After 2 years as a junior faculty member at Vanderbilt, one of the transplant surgeons left, and Wright Pinson, the transplant chief, asked if I would join he and Kelly Wright in what turned out to be on-the-job training. I owe a great debt to Kelly as a colleague and a lifelong close friend, and Wright Pinson providing that career opportunity that has become my major professional focus. My first paper presented before this organization was in 1988 under the guidance of Ken Sharp and John Sawyers. After coming to that meeting, I knew this was a group I wanted to be affiliated with if I could. In 2001, 10 years after starting my first faculty position, I was recruited to WashU as the chief of transplant. Tim Eberlein, a giant in this organization, and Greg Sicard, emeritus professor and former member of this organization and chief of vascular and general surgery at WashU at the time, were instrumental to me in providing key guidance moving forward for program building and avoiding some major landmines. Without their help, without question, the move to WashU would have been a failure. There are many individuals from this organization who have provided great advice over the years to me and to so many of you in the room. There are several that I would like to specifically recognize. J. David Richardson, past president and honorary member of this organization, might be the only surgeon that I'm aware of who's been boarded in general surgery, thoracic surgery, vascular surgery, and surgical critical care. He's been a major leader in our organization and our field. Sadly, Dr. Richardson died from complications of COVID infection several months ago in Saratoga, New York. Past president of this organization, Wayne Meredith, was diagnosed with multiple myeloma last year and has recently completed intensive chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant. Impressively, he has remained engaged with the American College of Surgeons and regrets that he was unable to attend the meeting this year due to his ongoing recovery. Last year's canceled meeting, as we heard, is the first time this organization hasn't had an in-person meeting since 1942, and this occurred because of COVID. COVID has clearly been the major overarching event of the last 2 years, and I'd like to remind everyone just what a nightmare we've lived through. The first cases of COVID began to be recognized in January 2020, shortly after our last meeting. By March, only 2 months later, this viral illness had rapidly spread and resulted in a worldwide lockdown. We all faced dire circumstances, with furloughed and fired staff, reports of medical center impending economic disaster, and salary and 401k reductions. Somewhat miraculously, by May 2020, phase 1 clinical trials for vaccine development were started, and in July, phase 3 trials were started. In December, the first vaccine doses were released only 6 months after initial development, and most physicians in this room received their first dose. Alarmingly, around that time, initial variants were identified, and fear surged whether vaccine therapy would be effective. In July and August of this year, the Delta variant emerged, and most recently, we now are facing Omicron. There have been over 250 million confirmed cases of COVID worldwide and over 5 million deaths due to this worldwide pandemic. something never seen in the course of our lifetimes, and not since the worldwide pandemic of 1918. There are many aspects of the changes that have taken place that I will not begin to attempt to cover, except to say that it's been like organized chaos. I would remind everyone today how truly terrifying things were in the initial weeks and months, especially around concerns of hospital access, operating room availability, intensive care unit availability, ventilator support, and the dire predictions regarding finances for so many. Fortunately, we were able to successfully generate vaccines and pivot and recover financially, and maybe more importantly, emotionally. I'm not going to reiterate what exactly was thought to be the viral origins of COVID, but I would like to mention the initial city of discovery, Wuhan in China, a city most in this room today had never heard of before COVID, and many have thought of as a village in China. In fact, Wuhan has a population of over 11 million people, larger than New York City. And it's one of the largest municipalities in China and is a very sophisticated city. In some respects, it's very similar to St. Louis in the sense that it's located in the middle of the country based on river traffic and commerce from the interior of the country. I don't consider myself a particularly worldly traveler, certainly not in comparison to many in this room. However, I've been to Wuhan on 3 occasions in the past, all at the invitation of Professor Xiaoping Chen, a famous HPV surgeon and chair of surgery at the Tongji Medical Center, one of the largest liver cancer and HPV programs in China. This slide shows Professor Chen at one of the Chinese chapter HPV meetings, an event attended by over 3,000 Chinese HPV surgeons. Hepatitis B and hepatitis C and hepatocellular cancer are major conditions in China, much more prevalent than what we see in the United States, even though these are major problems for us also. Professor Chen is an honorary member of the American Surgical Association and one of only a few surgeons holding such a prestigious position from that country. On the right, Professor Chen is shown at the time of his most recent visit to Washington University, along with one of his colleagues who spent 2 years in a postdoctoral exchange with members of our research team. Interestingly, in January of 2020, I had plane tickets with plans to travel to Wuhan in May of last year before everything shut down. One of the issues that's really come to the forefront with COVID has been the COVID-related disparities that we've seen. Compared to whites, non-Hispanic blacks have had almost a 3 times higher hospitalization rate, with almost 2 times higher mortality. Hispanics have had similar hospitalization and mortality rates, and these have only been exceeded by Native American Indians. This slide shows what has happened with the death rate based on where people lived and their economic status. Initially, COVID seemed to be much worse in urban areas, as shown in the graph on the left. But by last December, the mortality rates were actually seen to be higher in rural areas, probably related to reluctance of rural residents to be vaccinated. On the right, what has become apparent is that those in high poverty areas have had exacerbated mortality rates. And as you can see, they're significantly higher than those in areas with low poverty. These inequities, while recognized in the past, seem to be especially appreciated broadly by a greater proportion of our society today. What is now recognized is that there are substantial inequities for patients, but also for broad groups in our society. What has become glaringly apparent is the healthcare disparities that we face in the South. We have some of the highest rates of obesity, end-stage renal disease, cardiovascular disease, and death, amongst other indicators of healthcare disparity. And this impacts all of us and all of our patients. This slide demonstrates the state ranking of mortality for women is an example of differences that exist nationally. While New York has seen a dramatic drop in mortality for women 55 and older, and what you can see on the left of the graph for New York, mortality for women older than 55 ranked almost 50th in 1980. Today, it's in the top lowest 10%. While on the other hand, Oklahoma has seen rates go from the 20th percentile to almost the worst in the country. Many southern states, similarly, are just not keeping up with gains seen in other parts of the country. So what are some of the causes of this marked health disparity? The causes are clearly multifactorial, but include education access and quality of education, healthcare, including availability of providers, and culturally appropriate care. We have a marked disparity in living environments, including poor access to healthy food options and limited access for housing and transportation. We still suffer from significant discrimination, and our support systems and society interactions are limited. Finally, the economic disparity is dramatic, and with poverty levels that seem out of control, with high levels of debt, and these are all exacerbated by medical expenses. One issue that has struck me has been systems in place that may have contributed to the problems we face in terms of disparity and social isolation. This is a slide that Will Ross, one of our transplant nephrologists, loaned me regarding areas of poverty in St. Louis and some of the disparities we face. But I would say these are probably not much different from what exists throughout our country. So while you can see shown in the red, this map on the right side is a Mississippi River with the city of St. Louis abutting the river. And what you can see in red are those high poverty areas, quite distinctly different from what's on the left, the dark blue, which are affluent areas in our county. So while these are just zip codes, perhaps, of where people live, I don't think it's just accidental where these clusters exist. This is a map also of the city of St. Louis. Again, the Mississippi River would be on the right side of the city, and various areas of the city. And what this shows are restrictive covenants that were put in place in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, by the City Council of St. Louis. These are zoning ordinances that were established to mandate where ethnic groups could live. This wasn't just for African Americans, but it was also for other ethnic and religious groups. While official segregation was over by this time, restrictive covenants and zoning laws were in place that formally kept diverse groups separated. This is carried over till today, where we have isolation of ethnic groups in our cities. Well, what about access for organ transplantation, something of great interest to many of us in the room here today? Black Americans are less likely than white Americans to be identified as transplant candidates, being referred for evaluation and being listed, and in some settings, actually receiving a kidney transplant. Tomorrow, the afternoon papers, if I've mentioned, will have focus on some of the disparities we face. And one of those papers highlights where we stand with altruistic kidney donation, including how these tend to go preferentially to white recipients. Black Americans are more likely to receive lower quality kidneys and have, in some settings, worse transplant graft survival. Interestingly, for rural residents, which make up a large part of the South, organ donation occurs at a higher rate. But access to receive organs does not match that donation practice. Waitlist and transplantation tends to occur at lower rates than for those living in urban areas. This report, published in the American Journal of Transplantation in 2017, demonstrated that marked disparities exist in the proportion of waitlisted individuals who live in the highest risk counties is compounded by the distance such individuals tend to live in relation to transplant centers. I'd like to take a moment and tell you about some opportunities we've taken advantage of to try to increase organ donor availability for transplant. In 2001, we at WashU were the first to partner with our OPO, our Organ Procurement Group, to establish an organ recovery center where brain-dead donors are moved to the recovery facility for optimal management and organ recovery. More recently, as you heard earlier, we've begun to use machine perfusion to take advantage of marginal liver organs in an attempt to make more organs available for transplantation. This slide shows the Mid-America Intensive Care Unit and operating room. This facility also contains a cardiac cath lab, CT scanner, and full laboratory services. The practice has been so successful that the OPO utilizes an air transport plane to move donors greater than 70 miles away into the facility. The practice has resulted in a dramatic cost savings, around 45%, and has resulted in increased numbers of organs recovered. There are now 11 such centers around the country, including in New Orleans, Jackson, Mississippi, Birmingham, Atlanta, and others. This process works. 2 years ago, we were one of the leading sites of a machine perfusion trial where marginal livers undergo liver pumping for up to 24 hours prior to transplantation. Following that trial, and that's shown in the picture, the device that we use. Following that trial, we decided to assess the possibility of assessing declined livers. In other words, those livers rejected by all transplant centers offered the organ, to see whether this would be a possibility to safely use such organs. We started an FDA investigator-initiated study at that time, and have since pumped 12 livers, a small number, but a great start. And of those, 9 have been successfully transplanted. We think this will be an option that can be implemented broadly to increase transplantable donor livers. This slide shows the steady growth of organ transplants on the left, arising from the OPO. And this increase has increased transplant availability for all racial and ethnic groups. The slide on the right shows organ donation for non-Hispanic blacks. And this has been a targeted area of intervention from the OPO. I don't have a pointer, but what you can see in the dark blue, Missouri and Kansas are one of the few areas in the country that have had the very highest donation by non-Hispanic blacks in the country. We've had great success building our programs, and I would just point out this would not be possible without the efforts of a large group of dedicated surgeons and physicians, but also our many affiliated staff and mid-level practitioners. I'd especially like to thank the surgeons who make up the transplant team. Transplantation is one of the unique areas of surgery where surgeons cannot act in an isolated fashion, as happens in many other areas of surgery. In transplantation, because of the 24/7 nature of the procedure, there are by necessity handoffs that have to occur, often at difficult times and complex surgical situations. It takes a special level of trust to work through these difficult situations, and I really would salute our team for being able to manage that. I'd also like to point out the unique relationship that we have with our HPB team, with many overlapping liver-related and liver cancer-related conditions. Bill Hawkins currently leads the HPB section, and he, including several past members of the group, have been key individual leaders in this effort. So, with all the recent events that had occurred, our organization has unique opportunities moving forward. Webster's dictionary defines opportunity as a favorable juncture of circumstances that sometimes involves risk and often occurs after a destabilizing event. And I think we are at this point today in our society. The COVID pandemic has created a terrible social situation for all of us worldwide. With this social isolation has come time for reflection, and what has become clearer is that some long-standing disparities exist that are apparent across society. In addition, we have seen events with the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery killings that have shocked our society in a way not previously fully appreciated. This has led to buy-in by broad groups in society. COVID-related, while we were unable to have an in-person meeting last year, we did conduct a virtual business meeting, and at that time we announced the formation of an ad hoc diversity, equity, and inclusion committee to look at our own organizational diversity. This slide shows the individuals who kindly agreed to be part of that effort, with committee chair Mary Klingensmith and co-chair Bob Higgins leading the effort. Suzanne Klemberg, Day Chung, and myself acted as ex officio members of the team. We were subsequently able to meet on 5 occasions to address a variety of factors that the committee felt would make the Southern Surgical Association a more welcoming and diverse organization. One of the major goals of this effort was to make opportunity for the Southern Surgical membership to be a more diverse organization. This has involved a number of facets, including membership criteria. We have had task force recommendations, which I'll review in a second. This group will continue targeted outreach and possible interventions to help our diversity efforts. Recently, the council of this organization has formalized principles that have been used for membership in this organization. And let me review these briefly. Membership is based on objective criteria and valued characteristics. Candidates are identified by members, vetted by the council, and voted on by membership. All candidates, as a minimum, meet the following criteria: active practicing surgeon, particularly accomplished surgeons as reflected in their letters of recommendation. Candidates are highly regarded by their peers. In addition, additional factors that are considered including professional and overall criteria, scholarship and teaching, leadership and service, as well as distance traveled and valued characteristics. This shows task force recommendations. Yesterday, these were reviewed by the council, and these were adopted moving forward. First, the task force requested to become a standing committee of this organization, and this will continue with the formation of an inclusive excellence committee. Second, a primary duty of the committee, as I mentioned, will be to identify candidates that perhaps have not been recognized or identified in the past. The committee recommended making transparent the pathway to leadership, and also to have programming focused on disparities in healthcare outcomes and health equity. And this we've already started with our speaker tomorrow afternoon at 1:30 and our afternoon session. Additional recommendations from the task force included being sensitive to, as an organization, to having membership inclusive sensitivity, to increase the diversity of the program committee, to consider the venues for this meeting and make sure these are continue to be welcoming, and to sponsor scholarships for those of diverse background to attend the meeting. And that is already underway and will be part of the recently funded grant that I'll mention. So, while our ad hoc committee was at work over the past year, the American College of Surgeons undertook a broad effort to affiliate their activities with many surgical associations under the initiative of Dr. Tim Eberlein and Wayne Meredith, as well as Nancy Gant, amongst others. In June, a retreat was organized, and 2 of us from the Southern Surgical participated in the retreat. Over 50 organizations and surgical societies with almost 200 representatives participated. At that retreat, the American College of Surgeons announced plans to award $300,000 with match awards from parent organizations for those receiving grant funding. Over 20 competitive applications were submitted requesting funding, and I'm pleased to report that the DEI committee, under the guidance of Mary Klingensmith and Bob Higgins, were able to successfully receive one of these awards, which included matching funds from the Southern Surgical Association. This slide shows the primary investigator submitting a request for funding, showing those that were funded. Bob Higgins will discuss the specific plans for implementation of the grant funding tomorrow. I think we all should be very proud of this award for the Southern Surgical Association, and to Mary and Bob for putting this together. Of note, we were the only regional surgical society to receive such an award. So what can we do as an organization and also in our institutions to organize, to address existing healthcare disparities? First, we need to raise public and provider awareness of the racial and ethnic disparities in care that exist. Without recognition, efforts for remedying this situation will not occur. We need expansion of health insurance coverage, including Medicaid expansion, which has not occurred in many of our states in the South, and Midwest, including Missouri, which ranks 50th, the bottom 50th, in healthcare-related funding. We need to improve the capacity and number of providers in our underserved communities, and we need to increase the specific knowledge base on the causes and interventions to reduce disparities. This is an opportunity for all of us to make a difference. Before closing, there's one individual I'd like to recognize who's been a close colleague and friend over the years, Dr. Steve Stain and his wife, who we've known since our time in Nashville and before that. Connections made, especially with this organization, are unique and important. Now, while we do like Stephen and Hyacinth, what we've especially appreciated has been getting to know the Stain kids. And shown here is George Stain on one of his trips to St. Louis. George is our godson. Finally, before closing, I'd like to mention a connection that I would have not ever predicted that I've only in the last couple of years realized. About 6 years ago, we were at a winter retreat at the American Board of Surgery in Miami, and we sat next to Spence and Marie Taylor at one of the dinners. Well, they began to talk about their first grandchild, and as all proud grandparents are prone to do. They said their son-in-law was from Walterboro, which caught my interest because of our family ties. We asked what the name of their grandson was. Graham Buckner. And at that point, I realized this was just too strange. Growing up, I heard from my father on a number of occasions that one of his most difficult times as a physician was when he was called before dawn one day in January after a pre-dawn boating accident. His across-the-street neighbor and close friend had drowned while going duck hunting, and he had to deliver this devastating news to the man's wife, D.M. Buckner, 7 months pregnant with their first child. Well, she subsequently delivered a healthy baby named Bucky, who became a surrogate son to my family, my parents, and like a sibling to my sisters. Years later, Bucky became a prominent attorney and judge in Walterboro who would look me up and take me to dinner while I was in medical school when he was in Charleston. So the Taylor's grandson is the great-grandson of my parents' friends who died in that tragic boating accident. It's a small world we live in. Thank you very much.